Welcome, everyone. Today's webinar is intended for organizations that are interested in bidding on the RFP that is currently open for the Clean Cooking Behavior Change Communication, or BCC Fund. We received a number of letters of intent on Tuesday, so really great to see so many organizations interested in this opportunity, and really great to see quite a diverse and interesting set of organizations. This webinar is really designed to provide organizations interested in the fund to have a chance to ask any last questions that you may have and really gain clarity so that you can develop a really great proposal that is responsive to the RFP and aligned with the expectations of the Alliance. So this is Julie Ike speaking. I'm currently the Manager for Market Research here at the Alliance. And so I've been overseeing the consumer research that we've commissioned over the last couple of years, which was really designed to provide us with a better idea of the demand landscape for cook stoves and fuels in our focus countries. So we did some market segmentation and really took a look at what are some of those key enablers and barriers for solid fuel users in making the switch to more efficient and cleaner cooking. And so I look forward to applying those insights to the BCC work and continuing to learn more about how to reach and motivate our consumers as I transition into managing this BCC work. And I'm joined here today by Brian Smith, who's our Chief Operating Officer. He joined the Alliance about a year ago and comes from PSI, where he spent many years designing, implementing, and evaluating social marketing and behavior change programs in the health sector. So in addition to his COO role, so in his free time, he's been providing and will continue to provide technical oversight for our BCC work. So moving forward, the two of us will be your main points of contact for the behavior change communication work here at the Alliance. What will we cover today? Okay. So we conducted a webinar back in January to introduce our partners to our overall Alliance BCC strategy. So I won't go through all of that again here today, but I did want to just share a few slides to get us started that set the overall context of the BCC Fund and provide a bit of background on why the Alliance is investing in this space and what our goals are in making these investments. But again, our primary goal here today is to answer questions that you may all have. So if you joined the webinar last month, you may have heard some of this first half before, but just bear with me for about 10 minutes. And a lot of this was incorporated into the RFP as well. But again, we just want to set the context here and reinforce some key points. And then we'll go ahead. So we'll talk about where does BCC fit into the Alliance's strategy. How is the Alliance engaging in BCC? What does success look like for the BCC Fund? And then we'll talk about how to apply to the fund, and then go through some of the questions that were submitted previously, and then we'll go ahead and open it up to questions that people have today. Okay, so very briefly, where does BCC fit into the Alliance's strategy? Many of you who are familiar with the sector and have been working on clean cook stoves and fuels for a while now should be pretty familiar with this diagram. It represents the three key pillars of the Alliance's strategy as outlined by sector stakeholders back in 2010. It's divided into three areas: enhancing demand, strengthen supply, and foster an enabling environment. And the strategies outlined within these three areas are all aimed at getting us to our goal of a thriving market for clean cook stoves and fuels. And they're all critical to reaching that goal. Over the last 5 years, the Alliance has made significant progress toward our goal broadly, and particularly around two of these pillars, the fostering an enabling environment and strengthening supply. So we've done a lot of work around coming up with a set of standards and testing centers to test against those standards, building the evidence base, and then also have provided a lot of support to enterprises via grants, and also work to attract more investment for enterprises to the sector. But what we're here to talk about today really applies to this other piece, which is enhancing demand, which we've arguably focused less on to date. But we know that there are many challenges there. And generating this demand has been and will continue to be in part facilitated by the manufacturers and the distributors and others who are promoting specific brands and models. But what we've heard again and again from our partners is that they could use a little boost in making people aware of the products that are available, getting those products in front of consumers and convincing them to buy, and then of course continue to use the products. So this is where the Alliance feels it can really add value on the demand side with this sort of broader communication. And so this is where, our behavior change communication strategy comes in. And then just looking at the overall goals of the Alliance, as I mentioned, of course, one of our primary goals is to create this thriving market with, all three of those components that I laid out earlier fully functioning. But the other part of our goal is ensuring that, once the stoves are purchased, once we have established demand for them, that they're also adopted and used. Because we know that, many of the impacts that these technologies deliver are not possible if the stoves and fuels are not adopted. And generally, when we talk about adoption, essentially what we mean here is that the stoves are being used correctly and consistently. So we're talking about correct and consistent use, which is a term that may be familiar to those who have worked in other fields. So just emphasizing here that when we talk about adoption, what we really mean is correct and consistent use. And we know that there are multiple barriers to, getting solid fuel users to correct and consistent use of cleaner technologies. And we know that, some of those barriers cannot be addressed by communication. Oh, sorry. There you go. Okay. And we know that, many of those barriers cannot be addressed by communication, but we also know that many can. So we mentioned some of those in the RFP, so low perception of the risks of traditional cooking, low awareness of other options, lack of social support, et cetera. And so that's where the BC interventions come in. But again, we know that those are not the only barriers, and that communication cannot address all barriers. So we encourage, people to be mindful of those other barriers, and that's why we emphasize the importance of ensuring an adequate response from the supply side in the areas proposed for these interventions. So, addressing barriers like affordability and accessibility, communication can only go so far with those, but the supply side can really address a lot of those. So, again, just wanted to emphasize here that we're aware that there are additional barriers, but with this particular work and this fund, we're focusing on the communication barriers, but staying mindful of what those other barriers are as well. Okay. And so the other thing that I just wanted to re-emphasize, again, we discussed this throughout the RFP and also in the webinar that we conducted last month, but it was just that, these campaigns, these interventions that we're hoping to fund are really designed to promote the entire category of clean and efficient stoves and fuels, or subcategories within that. And this is obviously a bit different than traditional marketing, where the goal is generally to increase the market share of a particular brand. But there are examples of this type of work in all types of settings. In the webinar last month, we shared the Got Milk campaign in the U.S., which was funded by milk producers to increase demand across brands. And then we also looked at some examples from the NGO sector, including mosquito nets. So there are lots of examples to learn from. This is not a new concept that the Alliance came up with, but there is evidence that this sort of category promotion can work, and lots that we can learn from there. And there's also lots that we can learn from behavior change communication more broadly from other sectors. I won't go into detail here. Again, we discussed it at length in the webinar last month, and I know that many of you are already familiar with this kind of work, but just to say that, behavior change communication has been, used within health programs for many years. There's a lot of evidence that it works, and there's a lot of really well-funded, long-running programs out there. But, less so in the clean cooking sector. And so we highlighted this in the RFP, but there was a review that was done a couple of years ago now that looked at some of the behavior change communication work that has been done in our sector. And there are some, great examples out there, but we're still, quite a bit behind from some of those other sectors, like HIV/AIDS or family planning. And so the goal, of the Alliance is to sort of catch up and get there. And so our overall objective with our behavior change communication work is getting to more and better behavior change communication for the clean and efficient cooking sector. And you'll see, of course, that the Clean Cooking BCC Fund is part of this overall strategy, but there are some other elements as well. And so I'll just briefly touch on those again. We talked about them at length in the webinar last month, so I won't go into a lot of detail here, but just wanted to share this broader strategy with you to provide sort of the larger context for the Clean Cooking BCC Fund. So you'll see we have sort of two key components for achieving our goal. One is through initiatives directly funded by the Alliance, which the BCC Fund is part of that. But, you know, our funding for these direct interventions is relatively substantial, but, you know, nowhere near what we would need to sort of get to the scale of this issue. We know that there are hundreds of millions, billions of people affected by this, so our funding will, you know, not come close to reaching that scale. So we're also, you know, looking to use the initiatives that we are able to fund directly to develop the evidence that we need to prove that, you know, behavior change communication is something that can lead to impact in our sector. And so demonstrating that evidence and being able to share it and use it to raise more funding for this work within our sector, but also to get, you know, more organizations who already do behavior change communication in, you know, in other related sectors to incorporate stove and fuel messaging into their work, and then directly building partnerships with those organizations as well. So we have sort of these two pillars of the direct alliance funding and then mainstreaming into other sectors. So I'll just talk briefly about some of the direct alliance funding. A piece that's sort of already in motion are what we call our small-scale interventions, and those are in 4 of our focus countries, Bangladesh, Ghana, Guatemala, Uganda, and we're hoping that these will be completed by the end of this year. Unfortunately, I don't think that they'll be fully wrapped up by the time we make the awards for the BCC Fund. But we, you know, do hope to be able to incorporate the learnings from those as we sort of ramp up these larger awards and get into the design and implementation phase. And these smaller scale interventions really build from the consumer research that I mentioned earlier, and they're relatively small scale, as the name would suggest. And again, building from the research and allowing us an opportunity to test some of the hypotheses that we developed in terms of, you know, what are those major barriers and how can communication be used to overcome them. The other piece of our direct funding is what we call our enterprise marketing support. You know, throughout we've emphasized that we want the behavior change communication campaigns to focus on category building and not promote any single brand, but we also recognize that brand level marketing is important. So we do plan to provide you know, direct marketing support to enterprises in the sector. Again, this is limited to the same focus countries that the fund is limited to. So that's, you know, Bangladesh, Ghana, Nigeria, Uganda, Kenya, and Guatemala. And the vision there is that we wouldn't necessarily release one RFP that would sort of support all of the enterprises at once, but would release this on a rolling basis and hopefully launching that in March of 2016. And so it's not a requirement that it's directly aligned with the BCC Fund, but of course we do hope that some of this enterprise support will coincide with some of the campaigns that would be going on that are funded under this fund. And then the other piece is national communication strategies. I think, again, this will be sort of on a rolling basis once we see where the BCC Fund interventions are going to take place. And then the other piece of our overall strategy that I wanted to mention was our reference group. So this is sort of a group that we've put together of, you know, BCC experts both within and outside our sector, who really sort of are there to steer us through our strategy. They provided a lot of input into the RFP that we developed for the fund, and will form the expert review panel to evaluate the proposal. So just wanted to note that have that. And so let's get into the fund, which is why we're here today. So I think, most of this is not new to anyone. This is just really an overview of what the fund is for and some of the details about it. So I think, this was all in the RFP, so it shouldn't be new, but we're looking to award up to $4.5 million, and that will likely be across 3 to 4 grants in 3 to 4 countries. And we anticipate that no single grantee will receive more than $2 million in funding. We expect that the duration of these grants will be about 2 years, or 24 months. And our primary goal here is, of course, to reach scale, as I mentioned earlier, but there's also a strong emphasis on evaluation, and we can discuss that more perhaps in the Q&A. And then again, our implementation is limited to these alliance-focused countries, which I've already mentioned, and I think based on the LOIs, people are very clear on, so won't go through those again. And then I just wanted to share, before we get into the Q&A, sort of what does success look like for the Alliance in funding these interventions. And these really apply to our behavior change communication strategy more broadly. So of course we want to be sure that we're implementing evidence-based interventions. So I mentioned earlier that our overall goal is to get to more and better BCC in the clean cooking sector. So of course by more we mean reaching more people and reaching scale, but by better we also mean that we're supporting interventions that are appropriate and really deliver impact and are evidence-based. Some other sort of metrics for us are, of course, learning and sharing knowledge. So as I mentioned, we have a lot to learn from other sectors where, behavior change communication has been used for much longer, and, there's some real evidence of success there. So learning from those lessons and what works and what doesn't work. And also, attracting those players directly into our sector. So I saw, a lot of really interesting partnerships in the LOIs between, those types of organizations who have that BCC expertise and those within the cook stove sector who have the expertise in the cooking sector. So really great to see those partnerships, and that's definitely what we were looking for. And then, of course, another key goal of ours is generating evidence that BCC works in our sector so that we can attract more funding for additional programs. And then, of course, our overall goal here is changing behavior. So, reaching our target audience, reaching those who are currently, still using solid fuels for cooking, and motivating them to make the transition to cleaner cooking and to, correctly and consistently use the technologies that we're promoting here. So what do successful proposals look like? A lot of these were listed in the RFP, so shouldn't be new to you. But just in looking at the LOIs, I saw a few areas that I just wanted to re-emphasize again here. So, we're looking for proposals that present a clear theory of change and, have a corresponding results framework that talks about, how you'll measure against that. So really outlining, what you want to do, why you want to do it, and why you think it will work. Also, successful proposals should really demonstrate a thorough understanding of the context. So what does the supply side landscape look like in a given country? And we're really looking for applicants to develop the right partnerships and develop familiarity with the local market players, including the local alliances that have been set up by the Global Alliance. The proposal should also clearly outline how the intervention builds the category of clean and efficient stoves and fuels. I know we've been sort of talking about this throughout, but again, just want to make that clear that, if it's a partnership with, a media agency and maybe a stove producer or two, that's fine, but again, our goal here is to build a category. So it should be made very clear how the intervention builds demand for not only, the brand promoted by a particular enterprise, but, across the category of clean and efficient stoves and fuels. And then another key criteria is just demonstrating the capacity to implement and manage scaled BCC activities. This will be really important for us. And then we'd also, when you're developing the proposals, we'd like you to really clearly outline what are your confirmed partnerships. Of course, in the LOIs, there are a lot of sort of tentative partnerships, and that's fine. Of course, it's just the LOI phase. But when we get into the actual proposal phase, we'd like to have those confirmed, and we'd like you to clearly outline what the role of each partner will be in those. Okay, so how to apply? The process is actually quite simple. For the applications, of course, the deadline is March 15th. We're giving you until the end of the day, Eastern time. So that should help. And then, we're just asking that you email your complete proposals to the email address that we use for the LOI. So that's proposals@cleancookstoves.org. And again, these are all outlined in the RFP, but I just wanted to emphasize here that the proposal should be 12 pages or less, not including, the cover page, budget, results framework, and any commitment letters, and should be single-space 12-point font. So please keep it to that 12-page minimum. We don't want, 40 to 50-page applications here. Also, just wanted to note that only 4 attachments will be reviewed. So that's the body of the proposal, the budget, the results framework, and the letters of commitment. So no need to send any additional attachments. And of course, you can combine everything into one if that works better for you, one document. And then we also request that you follow the guidelines outlined in the RFP on the sections. We, outlined, approximately how much space you should dedicate to the various parts of the proposal. So would request that you stick to those as much as possible. And just to note that the Alliance reserves the right to reject any applications that are incomplete or do not follow the requirements and guidelines that we've outlined. Okay. So, evaluation process and timeline. As I mentioned earlier, we formed this sort of external reference group, and so they will form part of the panel that will review all of the applications. And then the rest of the panel will be comprised of Alliance staff. And then the Alliance will make the final decisions on the funding. In terms of timeline, as I mentioned, the proposals are due by March 15th. And then our plan is to notify finalists by April 11th. And at that time, we may request additional information or perhaps some adjustments to the plan. And then we're hoping that final awards can be announced in early May, with grant agreements finalized and signed in June. Okay, I see that we already have some questions here, so let's move on to the Q&A session. We will certainly take the new questions that have come in, but I just wanted to go over some of the previously submitted questions that people have submitted to that proposals@cleancookstoves.org email address. So just going to breeze through those, and then, like I said, we'll go ahead and take the questions that people are submitting now. So first one, can this funding be used in multiple countries? So this was in the FAQs document that we released alongside the RFP, so this one has already been answered, but just wanted to reemphasize here that technically the funding can be used in multiple countries, but just given the size of the awards, which are relatively small given the scale and the number of people in these countries, we would prefer that applications focus on one country only, because we want to be able to deliver maximum impact in a country. So technically they can be used in multiple countries, but I would encourage in your proposals that you just select one country to focus on. And also to note, we don't expect to fund interventions through this RFP in every country that is eligible. So we have 6 countries that are eligible, but we anticipate that we'll only be making 3 to 4 grants, so likely interventions in 3 to 4 countries. Okay, so can organizations apply as part of multiple proposals? Absolutely, and I've already seen this taking place in the LOI, so just to confirm, that's definitely okay with us. We're looking for creative and interesting partnerships here, so would encourage organizations to seek out multiple partnerships to see what will work. And then also want to emphasize here again that an important criteria for us will be that an organization is able to demonstrate the capacity to manage large BCC interventions. So would encourage those who maybe have less experience there to look into partnership opportunities as well. What is the top priority for this funding? Achieving scaled impact or testing different BCC approaches. Again, this was in the FAQs, but just wanted to make this clear again that what we're really looking to do here is achieve scale. That's certainly the top priority. But testing is also important and learning what works and what doesn't work. But wanted to emphasize here that we're not really seeing this as sort of a research project or a research intervention, but really seeing it as implementing activities that lead to impact and scale. Another question we had was, will these campaigns be followed by brand-specific campaigns? So that's a good question. What we're envisioning here, these campaigns will take place over 2 years. So we're envisioning that the sort of enterprise-level marketing efforts would continue to grow alongside the BCC campaign. So, and as I mentioned earlier, we'll be providing support to enterprises to do marketing for their brands. So, in short, no. These campaigns won't necessarily precede brand-specific campaigns. They'll take place alongside. Another really good question we had was, will the Alliance assist in facilitating contact with cook stove fuel suppliers in country? And in the case where multiple suppliers exist, will the Alliance assist in facilitating those that are best suited to meet increased demand? So again, great question. The Alliance is sort of technology and fuel neutral, so we're not really in a position to recommend which suppliers you should work with, but we do encourage you to make use of the various resources out there, that sort of outline who the major players are in a given country. So you can look at our partner directory on our website. We've conducted numerous market assessments across numerous countries and for all of the countries that are eligible under this funding. So I would encourage you to take a look at those to get sort of a sense of what what the stove and fuel market looks like in some of these countries. And then, like I said, we've also done consumer research in a lot of these countries. So I would encourage you to take a look at those as well. Another resource we have is our Clean Cooking Catalog. That gives you a sense of the different performance levels of these stoves. And again, as we outlined in the RFP, we're looking for, sort of stoves that are a bit higher performing, and so that perform above the sort of what we call the tier 2 for efficiency or emissions. And there's a lot more detail on sort of what that means if you're new to the sector on our website. And, I'm sort of listing off a lot of resources here, but also want to note that we will add sort of written responses to all of these questions to that FAQs document. So if you want to go back and refer to that, we'll provide links to all these resources there. So would encourage you to make use of those. Another question we had was, is it possible to have funds from the grant for the purchase of cook stoves or to fund as seed money to create small community enterprises to produce and market locally produced cook stoves? So these are both really important, pieces of making this all work. So, of course, in particular, having locally or having, cook stoves available, and in some cases that means producing them locally. So this is a really important priority for the Alliance, but, given that this particular fund is really focused on communication, this is not something that we would support for this fund. And then in terms of purchasing cook stoves, the Alliance's overall approach is market-based, so we wouldn't encourage anyone to be, purchasing stoves and giving them away. But if it's, maybe for purchasing for demonstrations or, for having, outreach workers able to have a physical stove to bring along with them, that would be okay. But again, not sort of purchasing, bulk amounts of stoves to be given away. That would not be supported. So if working with various partners as a consortium, is it mandatory to have a prime organization that will present and receive the grant? So yes. So we do not anticipate writing multiple grants to multiple organizations for one intervention. We will require that the overall grant goes to one prime organization, and then that prime organization can do the subcontracting to other organizations within its consortium. So another one we had was, do all members of the consortium need to be registered as partners of the alliance? That's a good question. And what we decided is that just the lead organization would need to be registered. So not every organization within the partnership needs to be registered. Another question we had was, can employees of the organization receiving the award be seconded to a government? So as we outlined in our FAQs document, we can't support governments directly, but certainly if an organization is able to second an employee to the government, that would be something that would be acceptable under this grant. And providing training or capacity support to local governments would also be fine, but our limitation there is that we just can't fund governments directly. Okay. And then the last two, what is the policy for overhead, indirect costs / profit? So for overhead and indirect costs, the Global Alliance for Clean Cook Stoves is part of the United Nations Foundation, and their overall policy is that overhead is capped at 13% of direct costs. So we'll have to follow that policy for this fund. So short answer there is it's capped at 13%. In terms of profit, these are grants. So we weren't anticipating that there would be profit here. And then last question before we get into the new ones, are there funding guidelines for DIFA that you can reference? I don't think there are any particular ones beyond the sort of geographic restrictions that we already mentioned. So I guess the short answer there is no.
Yeah, all the funding restrictions that apply, we've expressed in the RFP and also in these webinars.
Yep. Okay. So with that, we'll get that one out for now. With that, I know we have a lot of questions here, and wow, it's taking up more time than I thought it would. So let's go ahead and get started in answering the new questions that we have here in the chat window. Okay. So let me just pull these up. So the first one is what's included in direct costs. So I would encourage you to take a look at the budget template that we included in the RFP, where we've outlined what we'd like to see in terms of the budget and how it should be organized, and that should give you a sense of what the direct costs are. So of course, staff time, travel, the direct costs of implementing the intervention, developing the creative and the concepts, etc., would be included in the direct costs. So, but again, I would take a look at the RFP to get a sense of exactly what those are, or what we are anticipating they are. Okay, so. Okay, sorry, bear with me for just a second. Just having issues with my computer here. Another question, is it mandated to have consortium to apply for this fund? If yes, could the consortium comprise CSOs and enterprises manufacturers of ICS? So it's not mandatory that you have a consortium, but it is encouraged. And yes, certainly the consortium could comprise of NGOs or CSOs, and enterprises manufacturers of ICS. But again, in partnering with enterprises, you just need to make it clear how the intervention promotes across, a category or the category or a subcategory of stoves and fuels, and doesn't just promote a few particular brands. But yes, that partnership would certainly be possible. Brand level marketing. Does that mean specific to stove branding or stove brand? So not 100% clear on this one, but yes, that would mean, if your stove brand is the clean stove, that the brand level marketing would be promoting your particular brand, which could be, and you might have, different model names and things like that, but promoting your overall brand and promoting, the stoves and fuels that are produced by a particular enterprise. So is it okay to budget a portion of funding to assist in supplying demand for stoves created? So I think this question is similar to the one that I referred to earlier, where we would not we would not support, just the purchase of stoves to be given away. Yeah, so I think the answer is no.
If that's not the answer to the question, then I think that's Christina. She can ask that in a different way.
Yeah. Yeah, because I think some of these actually came in before I went over those. Okay, so another question. Within the budget categories listed, what costs do you anticipate seeing in formative research and M&E that would not fall into the other budget categories? So I think, what we had in mind for the M&E and formative research budget line item, was a lot of research, right? So, potentially working with a research firm, so if they're not part of the partnership, hiring that work out, and then also, fielding surveys. And, sorry, just pulling up the budget here to make sure I'm being clear. Yeah, so I think what we had in mind there was research work. So potentially, contracting out to a research firm and then also funding, any direct survey or sort of other work that would need to be done to collect the information for the formative research as well as for the M&E.
Yeah, I mean, maybe just to add on to that, we would expect that your proposal narrative would talk a little bit about how you plan to gather insights about the context, insights about the consumers that you're targeting. That's what we would broadly call formative research. So if that is part of your narrative, then we'd expect to see something in the budget that corresponds to the activities that you're proposing in the narrative. Similarly, for monitoring, again, we'd like to see in the narrative, there's a lot of space, but just generally what your approach to monitoring activities would be. And then in the budget, we'd want to see the corresponding costs related to those monitoring activities. It's not a specific question, Julie, but I think you did have a slide on clarifying what sort of, when we refer to monitoring versus evaluation, what we're expecting.
Yeah, so...
do you want to cover that now? Or?
Yeah, maybe we'll come back to that. So it looks like we had another question about what are the goal level indicators. So let's table that for now and go through some of these other questions, but we'll talk a little bit more about the M&E in just a minute. So another question we had was, when planning for scale, does the Alliance have any goals for scale? Would this be state, regional, or national? And could a robust state-level BCC campaign be adequate to demonstrate successful campaigning and allow for national scale-up? So that's a really good question. And it's a bit challenging to answer because I think it's very context-specific. So, a state in Nigeria could be as large as, the entire population of Guatemala. So I think it will really vary. And, like I said, there hasn't been a lot of BCC work done in the clean cooking sector. So we don't have a lot of sort of, precedents to build from in terms of, given this amount of funding, what kind of scale can we reach and what sort of impact can we deliver? So I guess the short answer is I think it depends on the context, but I would also say that we're definitely not anticipating that, all of these campaigns or probably any of them, would be at the national level. I think that's really ambitious for the amount of funding that we have. And so, interventions that are at a state or regional level would certainly be acceptable. And yeah, our overall goal here is that with these interventions we can demonstrate that BCC can be successful in our sector, and then hopefully eventually continue to scale and perhaps reach that sort of national level campaign. So, good question. Okay, so to be sure of understanding well the idea of brand or category of clean and efficient stoves or fuels, would a proposal focused on one fuel only be acceptable? That's a good question. So I would say yes. Again, the interventions can promote across the entire category. That's great, but subcategories within stoves and fuels are also acceptable. Again, just not any one particular brand, but I think fuels are sort of general enough and cross multiple brands. So all that to say, yes, one particular fuel would be acceptable. So the next question is about external evaluation and sort of when we would have this in place, and emphasizing that we would need to conduct a baseline or some sort of survey before the interventions are actually launched. And so what is that planned timeline for evaluation? And so that's a good question, and I'm going to again table that for a broader M&E discussion that we'll have after we answer some of these other questions. So really good question. We'll come back to that. Oh, shoot. Okay. So do you mind sharing roughly how many LOIs you have received? Unfortunately, no. We're not going to share that. Okay, so next one, as responses may come in from both private and NGO partners, will the evaluation process include experts from both sectors? So that's a good question, and it sort of ties back to the earlier question about our plans for the external evaluation. So maybe I'll just answer that now.
Just to be clear, I'm not sure if he's referring to the evaluation process for the proposals or for the for the project. I took that question to be evaluation process for the proposals. Is that right?
I think he just said it. You said for the proposal. Okay. Thanks for clarifying that. So that's a good question, and I would say yes. Our review panel, our reference group, has sort of a diverse set of people with diverse backgrounds. So people who are more NGO focused and who have more expertise there, but also people who have experience from the private sector as well. Okay. So the next question is about whether each member of the consortium should have all of its members registered, or if only the lead organization needs to be registered. And so I think we answered that earlier, but just again, we decided that only the lead organization needs to be registered as a partner of the alliance. So not all of the partners within the consortia need to be registered. Okay, so another question about the M&E. So we'll hold that one for just a minute. Okay, another question about the results framework. How much detail do you hope to see there? One would think the activities will depend on the formative research. That's very true. And can they be indicative? So yes, but we'll talk about that in more detail. The RFP talks specifically of household cooking, and the draft results framework mentions households at the outcome level. Do we therefore assume that commercial and institutional consumers of energy are to be specifically excluded from BCC and brand promotion?
Yeah, so this RFP and the interventions that we'll fund out of it are focused on households. That's the focus for this communication fund. So not institutional consumers. If that happens, if that created additional demand amongst institutional consumers, that would be great. But the focus for this and what we expect to see is changes at the household level.
Okay. Okay, so a question on the enterprise marketing support. What will be the budget range and timeline of the projects funded under that support? And then what linkages will be expected with the BCC activities? So the budget range there is we're looking to award about five grants per country, so across the 6 countries that are eligible. But that will be sort of on a rolling basis, so it won't necessarily be that we give out 30 grants at once, or even 5 grants at once per country. And the sizes of those awards would not exceed $25,000 US. So they're not huge awards, but should hopefully provide some support to the enterprises. What linkages are expected with the BCC activities? Right now, there's no sort of certain expectation that those would be linked, but I think obviously, and we still don't know where these BCC interventions will take place. That'll of course be subject to the proposals that we get and the decisions that we make. But we would sort of be thinking about where those are taking place and where we would be providing the enterprise marketing support. But there's no linkage that has to be there. Okay. Another question. I understand the correct use varies by fuel or stove technology. How are you defining consistent? So I'm wondering if stove use monitors will be used to demonstrate the consistency of adoption. So that's a good question, and maybe
why don't we
go to the M&E? Yeah. So we have a lot of questions on the M&E. So let's just go ahead and talk about that. So this is the results framework that we included in the RFP, so hopefully shouldn't be, new to you. And this is where we try to sort of make clear, what evaluation would be done by an external party versus what evaluation would be done by the grantees. I think admittedly there will be a little bit of a gray area here in terms of between these intermediate outcomes and the outcome level. But all that to say that, what we anticipate is that the sort of external third party that we identify would be looking at the adoption metrics. So, to Kate's question, how consistently the stoves are being used. And then the grantees would be looking at some of those, ensuring that the activities are being implemented as planned, looking at some of the outputs, so how many people are being reached, what are people recalling the messages, are they understanding them, and then, what are sort of the changes in terms of knowledge, attitudes, and beliefs, and intent to purchase. So that's sort of the way we've tried to divide this here. And the indicators that will be developed, I think we had a question earlier, of course, yes, they will be very subject to what the activities within these interventions actually look like. So it's fine that for now this is sort of illustrative. We won't, hold you to this results framework that's submitted as part of the proposal, because of course we understand that, the overall strategy and some of the, activities funded under the intervention might change. So
so maybe just starting at the activity level, there was a question about whether the formative research would then, would be allowed to inform what activities are proposed. I think that's fair, although I think we would expect to see in the narrative that organizations that are applying already have a sense of the context and a sense of their theory of change about what needs to happen to eventually arrive at adoption at the household level. So while there may be some sort of verification or validation of that theory in the formative research, we hope that's pretty solid and based on your understanding of the context. So that was a question about the activities, I think. Again, to reiterate what Julie was saying, we would expect you to plan for and budget for monitoring at the activity level. You know, are things that you plan to do, are they getting done? And then also whether, you know, this is about communications, what is the reach, you know, what is the demonstrated reach of those activities? Who's actually hearing you? And then after the reach, are those activities having the intended effect on some of the barriers that you've identified to adoption? And that's sort of where your monitoring would stop. Where we would come in with the third-party evaluator would be above that, if you're looking at the slide here, above that sort of solid blue rectangle in the middle, where we would actually be looking at whether stoves are being purchased and used. We have not finalized the plans for that third-party evaluation piece. I would expect at this point that it would be very much based on household surveys and that it would be self-reported rather than using SUMS devices. There was a question about that as well. Then I think there was a question also about the timing on the third-party evaluation. Yes, we're aware that we would need to ensure that there is baseline data gathered about use before activities begin. And so we plan to have the third-party evaluator identified and ready to collect that data before interventions actually start. Now, of course, we want the third-party evaluator to work closely with the organizations that we select for these interventions because we need to design the evaluation accordingly. So we sort of have to go forward on parallel paths there, but we certainly recognize that we need to have the baseline data before interventions start. So I think we're trying to address 4 or 5 questions very good questions about the evaluation. If that's not responsive, please type in the chat window there if there are follow-on questions.
Yep.
Specifically on the M&E piece.
Okay, so
let's just see at the bottom if there's any.
Okay, so yeah, before we sort of move on from M&E, so the question is, yes, but will M&E evaluators use SUMS, not the grantees, just to clarify my question?
Again, they may, but I would suspect that much of the evaluation that we do will be based on self-reported data from surveys at the household level.
Okay.
But honestly, if we, once we have, made awards and are moving forward with contracting with the organizations that will implement these, if we determine that it would be extremely useful to have SUMS devices in place for what's going to be taking place, we may actually include that. But at this point, it's going to be more heavily on the household survey side.
Okay, and it looks like Kate had an earlier question about whether grantees will be compared to each other. Sorry, I must have missed that one. But I would say, our plan is that we'll work with one external evaluation fund to do, all of the evaluation across the intervention. So to the extent possible, we would have similar sort of indicators for each intervention, but they wouldn't necessarily be compared.
Yeah, there won't be a formal comparison, and the context will be very different, and the interventions might be very different, might be different fuel types, different stoves. So no formal comparison. We very much hope, though, when we have 3 or 4 awards made that, well, it's more than a hope, we will bring the grantees together from time to time to talk about their experiences in the different countries implementing these interventions. We really see that as a key part of this fund, that we bring the implementers together for a learning opportunity and that we share openly what's working, what's not working. We learn from each other, and then, if necessary, we improve the interventions as we're going along. So that's very much part of our philosophy on this fund, is that we bring people together for learning opportunities, not for a formal comparison of who's winning or losing, but so that we can learn.
Yes. Sorry. Okay, so looks like we answered that question. Great. Okay, so maybe steering away from M&E for a bit. Looks like we have some other questions here. Sorry, I think Christina had two, but they're somewhat similar. So is it okay to use a portion of the funding to supply access to credit for households wanting to make the purchases? So this is a tricky one. Going back to what I mentioned earlier, the focus of these interventions is really on communication. So we would not look to fund things like financing or, increasing distribution, but we know that those are really important. So, would encourage you to look for other sources of funding to sort of address those barriers, but unfortunately, here we're really focused on communication, so would not look to directly fund those under this fund. And I'd say likewise on your other question about whether donation of stoves is acceptable when not used in the household. Okay, so it's actually a little bit different than I thought. So this would be to create centers for demonstration at community levels and create demand for purchasing at the household level. So yeah, that would be acceptable. Again, we're not looking to support bulk purchases of stoves that are sort of given out all over the place, but certainly if you need to purchase some stoves to be able to have a physical, tangible thing to present to consumers at, a community gathering, or even if it's outreach workers who are going door to door, then that would be acceptable, I would say. Do you have a specific definition of an improved cooking stove? That's a very tricky one, and could really be an hour-long conversation in and of itself. But I would encourage you to take a look at some of the language that we have on our website that defines how we define clean and efficient cook stoves, and I can provide links to that into the updated FAQ document that I'll produce after this call. But it's certainly an important question, but again, it would require a very detailed answer.
Yeah, please refer to the language that's in the RFP about tiers that we're expecting, and then if the tiers are not clear, then you can go to our website where the tiers are explained in quite a bit of detail, and then that'll give you a sense of the landscape of technologies that would be acceptable under these awards.
Okay. So another question on whether the fund would support work beyond the household level, so for small-scale food cooking or selling entrepreneurs. I think we covered this earlier, but again, our focus here is household, so we would not look to directly support activities that would promote cleaner, use of cleaner cook stoves by food sellers or institutional stoves.
Yeah, I think we answered. And we keep going.
Okay. So another question on indicators. I think we covered that.
Kate was saying that I think we answered those.
Okay, great.
This thing.
Okay. Well, organizations which have submitted LOIs enjoy some kind of preferential treatment when submitting a proposal, as opposed to those who have not. That's an interesting question. I'd say formally no. There's no sort of list that you get put on for submitting an LOI that sort of puts you above others. But we do very much appreciate and keep in mind those who did submit the LOIs, because like we mentioned in the RFP, it really gives us a good sense of sort of what are some of the ideas that are coming in and what those partnerships look like. So we very much appreciate that you have submitted an LOI, but there's no formal preferential treatment for those who have submitted. Okay. Okay, so I did not see any budget heading to present intervention costs like campaigns, courtyard meetings, street theater, etc. So we were envisioning that those would fall under the communications category within the budget. So within that, we had allocated budget for, or we would expect you to allocate budget for producing the communication, so producing the visual and the developing the creative concept, but then producing the visuals or the radio content, and then also for the placement of those. So if you're using mass media, of course you'll have to pay to places on the radio, TV, et cetera. So that would be covered there. And then in this sort of other line is where we're anticipating funding sort of other forms of outreach. So more on the interpersonal communication side, which could include all those things that you've listed. So street theater, community meetings and courtyards, et cetera. So just to be really clear, that would fall under that other line in communication.
Yeah, for the question about financial audit, no, you do not need to budget for a financial audit.
Okay, that was easy. Besides BCC, we may need to do promotion for some quality brands. Is this cost allowed?
I think we need to understand more what you mean by quality brands. Some people mean by that a seal of approval, a quality seal of approval. If that's what, maybe you could give us a little bit more specifics on what you mean by quality brand. If it is a specific brand of cook stove or fuel, then no, that's not what we would expect to see promoted in this sort of interventions focused more on category promotion.
Okay. So another question on how many LOIs were submitted. Unfortunately, we're not going to be able to share that with you, but we have a lot of interest. I'll just say that. Then we have another question that came in through the Q&A function, and I think we already addressed this, but talking about scale, are you necessarily referring to a national scope, or is the Alliance okay with focused interventions in specific geographical regions within a country? So as we mentioned earlier, given the size of this funding, we're certainly not anticipating that in every country, in every context, that it would reach a national scale. In fact, probably very unlikely. So yes, we are definitely okay with interventions that focus on particular regions or states within a country.
Yeah, so there's one more question about, back over on the chat window, about training local farmers to produce certain cook stoves. No, that is not a focus for this fund. Production of cook stoves is not a focus for this fund. If there are local producers of stoves who in general could be supported through a campaign that would raise demand for their stoves, then that would be fine, but not production of stoves.
Okay. Okay, so we're past time here. Maybe just wait, one more minute or so to see if there's any last questions. And again, we'll be posting written responses to these questions in the FAQ document. So we'll just update the current document that we have on the website. So if you want to refer back to them, note that we'll have written responses available there. Okay. Okay. A couple more questions here. So will you be evaluating in proposals whether there is sufficient enough support partnerships to supply the demand that is created from the BCC activities?
Yeah, I think that it would be important as part of your proposal narrative to try to address that. Again, the language we've used is that we have an expectation that supply would be able to respond to increases in demand. So in part of your narrative, you should address that, why you believe that if there is an increase in demand, that supply can respond. Either it's already there, or the supplier is willing, ready to go into that area. So that should be part of your narrative as well. So in that sense, yes, we're evaluating it, but we will not be doing a formal scoping in every geographic area that is proposed to understand deeply the supply situation, although we have a pretty good understanding of that already through our ongoing work. Last question. Yeah, I think we've answered that. It's focused on behavior change communication activities rather than on supply.
Yep. Okay, so I think with that, we're going to go ahead and close. Like I said, we'll post the responses, and then if you have additional questions, you can always send them to that email address, proposals@cleancookstoves.org, and we'll continue to post responses to the questions that we get to the RFA or to the FAQs document. And with
yeah,
that,
just to say thank you very much for these are excellent questions. We're really excited about the enthusiasm that we've seen so far through the response through the LOIs and also through these excellent questions. So we're very, really eager to read your proposals and wish you luck in putting them together.
Yep. Great. So thanks again for everybody for joining today. And with that, I think we're going to go ahead and close.
Thank you.
Thanks.